Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us as our midday featured speaker. We hope you're enjoying the conference so far, and we have a lot of great presentations to go later today as well. I'm not going to hold you guys up long because we definitely want to hear from our dynamic speaker, Dr. Ron Moses. Dr. Moses is the Deputy Athletic Director for Student Athlete Advancement, Revenue Growth, and Competitive Strategy at Old Dominion University. Since joining ODU in 2019, he has provided leadership across student athlete development, NIL, and revenue share programming, academic services, alumni engagement, and competitive strategy with the focus on aligning student success, competitive excellence, and sustainable financial growth. That is a lot. He leads key initiatives in external engagement and fiscal innovation, including corporate partnerships, donor relations, and community collaborations, and has been instrumental in building ODU's comprehensive NIL and revenue share infrastructure in partnership with campus and external stakeholders. Nationally, Dr. Moses serves as vice chair of the NCAA Committee on Academics and Eligibility and is a former president of the National Association of Academic and Student Athlete Development Professionals, N4A, where he has championed academic reform and student athlete well-being. A proud U.S. Army and Army National Guard veteran, Dr. Moses brings mission-driven leadership style rooted in service, accountability, and innovation. He holds degrees from the University of Georgia, Western Kentucky University, Louisiana State University, and Kansas State University. Without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Ron Moses.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Let me share my screen really quick so I can get started. Can you all see? Is this working? I got a technology check. Good. Okay. Nobody's saying no, so I think we good. So I appreciate you all for hearing me blab today for an hour during lunch. Thank you, Dr. Kemp, for the introduction. I know that was a lot of words, which essentially means I'm here to try to figure out how we can win and keep everybody sane at the same time, which is really tough, right? So I hope everybody is treading water through this basketball portal. I woke up this morning and was like, we don't have no players, so just trying to figure out some of those different things. And I think it's an appropriate time and topic to talk about just kind of where we are right now as a landscape and a lot of what we're dealing with on the national level, and just trying to make sense of it, right? I feel like every couple of days, right? If you look at like the history of academic reform and how it used to work, we used to have time, rules would change every 3 to 4 years. If that, it used to be really, really tough, really, really hard to kind of change some NCAA legislation to get things through. Now it feels like depending on what judge and what court and whatever happens, it happens, boom, just like in a drop of a dime, right? So a lot of the work that we're doing right now in the NCAA committees, right, with governance reform, is trying to not only react to some of what's happening right now, but also be proactive. And so part of what I want to talk about today, and part of like what I'll talk about a lot of times is just focusing on us, right? Focusing on us as the professionals, as the people that's been in this area. I think as the change goes, the pendulum, I kind of call it like a pendulum shift. It kind of started over here, and we said, hey, we need to do all these different things for the athletes. The athletes need this. They're not eating. They don't have money. They don't have a lot of different things. And then the pendulum swifted all the way to the other side, right? And now you have 18, 19, 20-year-olds making major decisions, changing legislation depending on how they feel, things of that nature, et cetera, et cetera. And the whole goal now is how do we react to it, right? So a lot of times we're focusing on professional. A lot of these conversations, we don't think about the professional necessarily, unless it's the football coach or somebody like that. So we really want to kind of talk about the student support professional or the people that's kind of in the field, folks, boots on the ground. Obviously, we had a time when house was being implemented. There was positions being cut. There was things being downsized. So how do we kind of stay flexible, right? How do we stay malleable as an organization? In general, right? Just organization at the top level in all the different areas. And then how do you as a professional grow kind of in the midst of chaos, right? Because it's really tough in those particular areas. So we talked about changing landscape, right? In my opening thought, I already did at least some of it, but the landscape has changed immensely, right? I think about when I got here in 2019, none of this was happening, right? It doesn't feel like that 2019 was that long ago. So we even think about like COVID, right? Because that was such a pivotal time. Is everything changed since then? We had the transfer portal, we had NIL, we now have unlimited transfers. All of that changed since COVID, right? In and around COVID. A lot of that changed. Prior to that time, we still had some semblance of what we would call the normal or old model or change is normal now, right? So the landscape has immensely changed every year and it's continuing to change, right? Even if you think about the football portal or the portal period, we are on what? Every year the portal has existed, we have had a different iteration of the portal, right? It has went from unlimited to 60 days to 30 days to 15 days to two portal windows to one portal window, right? So the landscape not only has changed, but it's continuing to change and it will change until there's some sort of federal legislation or some sort of thing that gives us some sort of antitrust protection from lawsuits. The student athletes are evolving, right? We know this immensely. I don't think I have to tell anybody here who works on any campus, I don't care, big, small, about how your athletes are evolving, right? So here at ODU, we might not be LSU, but I guarantee you all the same, my students are still driving Benz and Benzes and BMWs and kind of running around doing their thing, and it's just it's evolved, right? It's evolved immensely. Agents, who the main of my existence, honestly, has kind of come into play. Things of that nature is really kind of put in there, and so the resources are dwindling, right? So not that they're dwindling for in general, right? Because we see there's a lot of money in the ecosystem, but in particular for what we do, right? So now, depending on your campus, how much money are people putting into student athlete support, right? How much are they putting into your academic areas? How much money are they putting into your student athlete development areas? Is there something that you used to do that they just like, look, I got to get another women's basketball point guard, that's going to cost me X. I don't really care about adding this additional position, right? Some people, some departments are quote unquote trimming the fat and kind of going through those things. So we know the resources dwindling in that way. Expectations are continuing to rise. Had a conversation literally yesterday with a recruit that wants to be a anesthesiologist and has not had a passing grade in science in 6 tries. But the coaches still want to tell them, like, yeah, they can still do pre-med, when they come here. It's like, what are we talking about, right? So not only that, right, you have your PTD issues, you have your immediate eligibility issues, you have the student expectation issues, and a lot of that puts a lot of stress and strain on your coaches, which now in turn comes back to you, right? And then now you trying to figure out, okay, how can I promise or not promise this? Because every coach is like, don't tell the prospect. Don't tell them, what it is that they can't do it here. The other schools are doing it. So everything that we have to normally go through. And so the real question is not necessarily what's changed, for them. It's more so what has to change for us. I think right now for a lot of people, trying to say that things are different and that we need to kind of go back to the old guard is kind of fighting a losing battle, right? So as we look at ourselves, we need to evolve as people. What is it that we need to change? Because it's different. It's just overall different. So kind of what we're going to talk about here in the next, 45 minutes, hour or so, and I'll allow some Q&As, is just kind of understanding the new landscape of student athlete support. What does it look like? What does student athlete support even mean? Right? We call ourselves academics, student athlete development, where I've kind of branded my department here just in general, just student athlete support. That's it. Student athlete support or student athlete success services. Everything success services for us, right? Anything that touches the student athlete, because we do so much more than that, right? So we're going from first person they probably tell they transferring is either their trainer or their academic advisor, or they're thinking about transferring, or things of that nature, right? So we're dealing with so much more. We're dealing with cars, we're dealing with interest rates, we're dealing with parents, we're dealing with children's mothers, right? We're dealing with so much more than academics that we're really becoming that crux of support. So we kind of branded ourselves success services because how are we helping them succeed in all aspects, not just academics, not just some of these different areas. And then that goes into defining our role in this evolving model, right? As the success support area, what falls under us, right? There's a lot of things that naturally fall under us. And what we do, it's time for us to, right? We have to define it. We have to really talk about that and kind of go from there because, again, most people don't really understand that. And then being able to get that upline. Does your athletic director understand what you're doing? Does your board of trustees, do they understand that we have this department that's giving these student athletes these pivotal growth methods and areas? And how can we expand upon that? Align our standards with best practices. The one interesting part when I say that sometimes is what are the best practices? The best practices is whatever works for you all at your institution level and at university, right? So when you hear things, when I go to things like N4A and regional rules in different areas, I'm taking bits and pieces from those and figuring out what happens here. What might work here might not work at LSU, might not work at TCU, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to make sure that we're aligning standards with best practices, and that we're continuing to learn from others in those different areas. And then the personal development, right? I always tell people it's hard to kind of come to work and have some semblance of intentionality without having your own intentional career and growth plan. So how does this work for you? How does this work even as a leader, right? If you're a leader and you're leading the team and you're in this really contentious time, like what are we doing to be able to grow and develop our staff? And at the same time, right, same with the students, the staff want to grow too, right? They students see students coming in and out, they going to get more money, staff wants to get more money. How do you kind of work with staff members in those particular areas? And then we got to redefine what success looks like for our work, right? So then again, what is it? You remember when we all used to talk about clustering, or we don't want to cluster, we want a bevy of majors. We want to make sure they graduate within a certain timeline. And then now we're just happy that they graduate, right? Or we just happy that they leave our institution, in a passing manner, right? So we have to kind of look at some of those different areas, right? And so that's kind of a little bit of what we'll talk about today. Obviously, we don't have enough time to get into any of these things in super depth, but we'll kind of touch points on these. And I'll give you just my overall thoughts from the national landscape and from what we've been touching on in the federal government up in DC, doing a lot of work up there with the CSC and different folks, and how we're kind of looking at it and how people are starting to look at some of these areas. So, new reality, NIL and rev share is here, and what does it mean for us? That's a great question. And it depends on where you at, right? Where's at an ODU, where we're sharing a good bit, we're sharing some millions, but we're not going to be at the cap, right? Versus a LSU and your SEC schools and others that are not only at the cap, they're beyond the cap, right? And they're using NIL Go and they're doing different methods to kind of continue to go beyond the cap, right? So there's this large resource boom, right? It's almost like the old oil rush. We're all looking for resources. We're looking for every piece of meat off the bone. How can we get additional resources to get more students or to get better students, right? In order to kind of keep us competitive in that enterprise. Coaches are driving it, donors are driving it, everybody's driving it. So what does this mean for us, right? We got student athletes that's making 2, 3, 4 times than what we make and what we ever might make, right? So what does it mean for us in that particular reality, right? Where do we fit kind of in this landscape, and being able to go from there? Student athletes, let me go back. Student athletes are professionals and amateurs in many ways. I hate personally when people say that this is pro. This is not pro. It's not pro because we can't hold them accountable like pros, right? So when I talk about accountability versus outcome, right? So if we think about employees and employment law, we think about if your student athletes were actually employees, 90% of them would probably be fired, right? If we really think about it, like somebody can't have a bad game and we right? Somebody can't not go to class and you know what I mean? It doesn't work like that, right? After their scholarship year goes out, you got to keep them on least scholarship. And now that we don't have this other portal window and ghost transfers, which is a whole nother conversation, it's even harder, right, to be able to move all along from student athletes, right? So we talk about accountability versus outcome, right? We know the student athletes have this level of outcome that they think they're going to get to, but the methods of accountability is not there at the same time, right? So that's why I kind of tell folks they're not necessarily professionals, right? They're still amateurs in many senses, but people kind of look at them and they think this is a professional sport, but we have to do so much more than professional sport, right? A professional organization is one team and that's what they're covering, right? So if I'm the New Orleans Saints, all I have to do is worry about my football players within the New Orleans Saints. And I don't have to worry about class. I don't have to worry about all these additional factors. Most athletic departments were worried about at least 18 to 20 plus sports. Not only are we worried about that, we also have a bevy of staff. We have a bevy of different people coming in. So it's just different in those different ways. So it's really tough because, again, we don't have that level of accountability that we really would like, but people want the outcomes to be the same. Expectations now include career outcomes and brand development. People want to know what's my brand, what you gonna do for me, right? That's all. Recruiting visits always were kind of like us begging. I always felt like please come here, let me take on a visit, let me show your mom, let's talk to you, let's look at all our cool stuff. Now we really like, okay, listen, look at all this stuff, and I'm gonna pay you a little bit, and let's talk about your brand, right? And so we talk about brand and we talk about building some of those things, and it kind of becomes a cliche term, but where does that fit within the development, right? And then we talk about career outcomes. A lot of times it is really, 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 really hard. And I think that people aren't talking about this enough. They're starting to, and we're starting to get more data and focus on these areas of what is the student athlete outcome now? right? I really want everybody to sit there and ponder the career outcome for them. Really ponder and sit on that, right? Really ponder and sit on that. So if your average player, especially in men's basketball, for example, is can make 125,000 up, right? Even at the non-basketball school level, right? Those guys are making a lot of money. So if I have somebody making 200, 300,000 and they're driving a Porsche, what does the career outcome look like for that young man? What does it? Right? I can give you a direct example now of a player of mine who made a couple $100,000 last year, and he is not going pro, and he is now working at the airport in Delta baggage, and he drives a Porsche, and he's having a real conversation of Ron, do I sell this car? Yes, right? You might not ever make that again, right? So I give my students the percentages of people who make six figures even as adults, right? You might not ever see or touch what you taught, especially if you were multi-hundred thousand students, especially if you're up in the millions, if you don't go pro. So what does career outcomes look like for them? Right? How do we get them to understand that? Okay, I know you made three, four, $500,000, but listen, this $60,000 job in the city of Virginia Beach, that's a great job with benefits, right? It doesn't necessarily really equate to them until they hit rock bottom, right? It's wait until those reserves start to dwindle, though that money, those accounts that they used to have, it starts to go. Then you can start to talk some sense into them. So how do we as professionals really start to figure out and really delve into career outcomes? That's the one thing I always say to agents, any attorneys I talk to, any media is like, hey, it's almost like when I was in the military. You know, they talk about a large percentage of the homeless population of veterans. So yeah, we did all this cool stuff when they were in, but what happens to them afterwards, right? What are the post graduation not only rates look like, but the successes look like, and that's really important in what some of these areas. Families are informed and more demanding, right? And I use informed in quotes because we all have student athletes who now have these additional pressures, right? I've never had this many families and this many parents really involved, or this many parents who want to move to the area with their kids, right? They want to move, like, oh, they coming to, okay, yeah, we're gonna look at houses too. Like, for what? We might transfer out in a year. Like, what are we doing? So we have families a little bit more informed. We have agents, right? Which is a whole nother dichotomy, a whole nother level. Somebody at play that's telling kids we don't have contracts. There's no assignability to value, but we have student athletes saying, hey, they not paying me enough, right? Because I know people are making X amount, but we don't actually really know. So we have agents working a non-regulated free market system where they're able to transfer every year. With the pro level, you got your contract, you know what this person made, you locked into your contract unless you got traded or released. That's kind of what it is. So we're working in a completely different system that doesn't really have any guardrails. And then institutions are completing well beyond facilities. We know sometimes if a student athlete, if it's not the number that they want, they might not come on a visit. Or I joked yesterday on one of my calls, why do we even have official visits sometime? Because if it doesn't hit their number, they kind of don't really want to come anyway, right? So we're kind of jumping through hoops in order to kind of hit some of those things. And so what this really leans out into is we're no longer just support staff, right? We are developers of people, brands, and futures. That's what we do. If you work in academics, you are touching on developing people, brand, future, everything. The conversations that we're having now are so multifaceted and so interesting. I don't think we do a good enough job telling folks about what it is that we do. People think when a student athlete comes over here, it's always study hall, right? That's what they're doing. They're working in study hall. I'm like, no, that's who kind of knows what's going on, right? Even in my position now, my AD's retiring, I'm taking over a lot of these different units and areas. I'm not in student support as much as I am, but I left my office here in the football academic area on purpose, just because like I can get a pretty good litmus and pulse of what's really going on with the athlete. And the more that you kind of take yourself away from that, the less you know, right? So it's really important to know folks in student support, student athlete development, our athletic trainers, they're the ones that are typically the most tapped into what exactly is going on with the student athletes and how we can help them the most. So the shift in our role is going from what I talked about previously, from academic support to holistic development. How do we define holistic development? I kind of tell everybody that's kind of up to you. So when you think about the person as a whole, right? What are the pieces of a whole person, right? Are we talking about professional, personal growth? Are we talking about brand development? Is it financial? Student success and what they really want, it differs from student to student to student. And I say that all the time. I have some students whose parents are really well off and they have their own businesses. And I know that no matter what happens with the student school wise, they're going to kind of be able to go back home and function in those areas. I have other students who are already making two, three, four times more than their parents. And this person, his career success, his or her career success is going to look a little different, right? And we have to navigate them along their pathways. So really figuring out holistic development that looks different for every single person. We're going from eligibility managers to life strategists, right? How many of us have talked about transfer portal or who's leaving after the season? Or, I mean, I got people coming in who's like, yeah, I came from Ole Miss. I'm gonna just be here for a year and then boom, I'm gonna transfer again, especially if I have a good season. How do I develop that person? Right? That's real. We no longer have this 3 to 4 year development map, right? When you make the map of like, okay, yeah, freshman year I'm doing this, sophomore year I'm doing this. It's completely changed. How do I develop a person that I know it's almost like a rental car for a year? What impact can I make on that person? What bad habits did they learn from their last institution? Or if they came from somewhere where they were already kind of high speed and good to go. Like, what am I teaching them at this point, right? How do I define success with a student athlete that I just met that I won't know long enough to actually be able to make an impact, right? So we have to really figure out what that looks like for each one of those athletes and build lasting relationships regardless of the time that they are here. We're going from reactive problem solvers to proactive planners. Really tough, right? So before we can kind of sit back and this person is failing here. They're doing some of these different things. We really want to help. Now we got to be super proactive. I'm super proactive now on everything we do. Summer is, hey, planning, schedules. Let's figure these things out. Where are these people kind of going? Where are we at with the money stuff? Everything kind of goes to being as proactive as possible, which is tough because we have to be proactive and reactive at the same time. Everybody knows Monday, 8:30, whatever problems wash out from the weekend, you got to deal with those while being proactive at the same time. And then we go from being compliance driven to outcomes driven, right? So what does that look like? Compliance driven used to be a little bit more of what I talked about previously, academic clustering, looking at how we can kind of keep folks in the same area of, okay, no, we want to make sure they're moving or they're transferred. Let me make sure that they actually have the same major. Figuring those things out is important, but it's a little bit tougher now, right? So we're outcomes driven. And what are the outcomes? What are the key intended outcomes? We obviously want them to graduate. We know that's a big and an important part is graduation, but we're also thinking about what, okay, they're coming in, maybe they have to do general studies, they have to do interdisciplinary studies, but we want to really have that outcome driven approach and mindset versus looking at it just from a PTD standpoint, which is really tough, depending on how many credits and things of that nature they're transferring in. So we go to what has not changed. Relationships still matter. We know that's important. That's paramount. Relationships still matter. That part of our job hasn't changed. I know the students, how much money in their pocket has changed immensely, right? What they drive has changed. What they wear has changed. What chains on their neck and what jewels in their mouth has changed. But relationships still matter. If you still want to get a student athlete, the same student athletes who used to come and sit on the couch in the office, they still doing the same thing. They haven't changed that much, right? Where they're that Hollywood that they're still not kids, right? Or still not, some people don't like the term kids. They're still not young men and young women. They're still there, right? So relationships still matter. You still want to build really good and attentive relationships in it. The good part about NIL and rev share is what I'll talk to some people about is some of the conversations I get to have now about buying cars and interest rates and LLCs and taxes and being able to write items off, right? And talk about wealth, growth, investing. And before you can even get to investing, you have to teach people how not to think with a deficit mindset because somebody who's been broke before doesn't mind being broke again. So when people are like, oh yeah, like they spending all their money. If they ain't had no money before they got here, you think they afraid of losing all their money again? No. So building those relationships is really important to helping that sink into them, right? Because they really are still looking for us from guidance. Yeah, they got the parents and everybody else, but they're still looking at us as really big guide points and points in their lives and pillars to be able to help them in some of those areas. That goes into trust. Same trust really matters. They want people that they can trust. It might not keep them at your school, but they're gonna trust you. They're gonna call you later. You know what I mean? That you're gonna be able to check in with them. You're gonna be able to go through those different things. So trust still matters. Same with consistency. We have to be consistency with our policies. This is also ever important now because people are transferring all over the place. So I have a student athlete, like I said, we on here with LSU. One of my football players, Trey Brown, went from ODU to LSU. Okay, we are trying to make sure, Trey, your credit's transferring. How does this work? How does all those things work? the receiving institution also needs to make sure that us as an institution that we're consistent in what we're doing and we're making sure that we're not failing the student athlete regardless of where they go. We have athletes interchanging between our institutions all the time. I don't care what level you are, everybody's interchanging, right? So it's important for us, even when I talk on the national level on my committee, they're just like, okay, Ron, well, you're at a group of five school. What does this necessarily mean for the SEC? Well, you're going to take my group of five coach and my group of five player. So consistency matters, or vice versa. Your P4 person may come to our level or FCS, things of that nature. So even though that we know things are a little bit more fractured on the competitive side, we know on the academic side, it's important to be consistent in those different methods, right? Student development is still the mission. It still is. It still is. I don't care what anybody says. Everybody who's writing stories, all the ages is talking about money. All the parents is talking about what's going to happen to my children. They are not the people that's there when it's time to take care of them, right? And I want to repeat that. They are not the people that's there day in, day out. You are. The folks that are in these different areas, we're the people that's there day in, day out. 365, they're not there. The agent's not there, the mama not there, the daddy not there. You know what I mean? The national media is not there. Everybody gets to kind of sit back and kind of come in and look at it and examine. And then, like we're an experiment that they put the lid back on and they walk away. Oh, it's good, it's bad. They did a good job, they did a bad job. But we're the folks that's here 365, right? So remember that student development is still the mission. When I watch a game, I always think of how much work it took to get that young man and that woman to that point, right? Whether it was easy or hard, right? From your admission to getting them here, to their housing, to their granted aid agreements, to them just going through practice and everything to get there. We all know that's a path and journey. It's not as easy as a lot of people make, but the delivery has to involve, right? So all of these different things still matter. We know relationship matters, trust, student development is still the mission. The delivery just has to evolve a little bit. What does that look like? What are the metrics? What does success look like for us? That's really important. So the professional gap, a lot of us were trained for a completely different model. A lot of us were trained for a different model. We were used to coming up and doing PTD tests and looking at the NCAA 48H and all those things. That still matters, right? So the one thing that we have, the fabric that keeps us from completely splintering apart and being professional. And this is the one thing in the courts, right, in the national landscape that we've been able to stay really clean on is academics. The moment we lose academics, we done. I'm just letting all y'all know. The moment that a judge rules that they don't need to be eligible. They just playing ball. Oh, we done. Right. So right now it seems like everybody is kind of on that same page. And we're starting to figure that out in the eligibility space as well. That okay, hey, academics needs to be the point. I think now when we talk about academics and age, that's kind of where the judges now are starting to be like, okay, well, we're getting a little out of control. Let's kind of bring it back in. And that's what you all see us now working on some of these legislations of, okay, from the age of 19, 5 years after that, you got 5 years or whatever it is, right? So we're trying to figure those things out because now it's becoming the age going pro, coming back down, which they never really cared about before. But now with the money in the plate, it makes it a little bit different. So we're trained differently, right? We learned a complete different model. It was all about academic advising, learner support, academic eligibility. That's what it was for us, student athlete development. That's the old model. That's what we learned. The gaps professionally of where we have gaps in really is, especially in a business driven environment, because it is. I hate the word business when we're talking about academics, but a lot of it is business driven. Because if you think about it, your student athletes' mindsets of what they're going to do is business driven, right? I know my student athlete who left here to go to my quarterback left, my receivers left. We had a great season this year. It was great. Great. Didn't even get to enjoy it. As soon as we win the bowl game, I'm getting on the plane and they're like, Ron, yeah, these people leaving. I'm like, we didn't even get a chance to celebrate. We're not even on the plane yet before somebody posts that they out of here. Business driven, right? Business driven, completely business driven. So we understand that, right? So if it's a business driven environment, us and student athlete support, what is it that we're trying to learn now? So we have to ask ourselves that, right? So there's gaps in financial literacy as far as our knowledge, personal knowledge of financial literacy and how we do that. I don't think we're ever, depending on the school you are, going to hire a financial literacy specialist to kind of teach some of those things. So there's some gaps in financial literacy, brand development. Again, they have professionals in these areas, but you all have been working just as long as these areas and can kind of tell students about some of those things. Career readiness strategy. We've always done career readiness for the most part since life skills has been out. But what's the readiness strategy? What does the strategy now look like? What are we setting with students in that area? Data outcomes and tracking that has completely changed. People tell me all the time, Ron, APR doesn't matter, GSR doesn't matter. These metrics don't matter. They matter to an extent. They really do. Kind of helps the school still stay accountable of, hey, this student needs to at least be eligible, right? Because that's still important to the overall growth of the student athlete. I need this student at least eligible. So that's very important. So we have to figure out what other data and readiness strategies are important to this particular area. Are we looking at outcomes, right? Can we actually track outcomes? In 4A, we always do a big project every year with the NFL where we're looking at outcomes. We're looking at, okay, data outcomes. Hey, did this person graduate? Did this person not graduate? We work with schools all the time. Like, okay, this person did, didn't. Let's go back. Let's figure those things out. So just figuring out a lot of those different things. And then even outside of graduation, what is the placement? Are we talking about grad school? Are we talking about jobs? Did they make enough to have entrepreneurship? What does that success look like and how do we define it? That's going to be really tough. And so we must close these gaps, right? These are the professional gaps that we have. And how do we close the gap? Like that's really, really important to figure out how we kind of work through some of those different things in those areas, right? So, and again, it's really tough because what am I telling now? Am I telling the director at school you like, yeah, I need you to stop everything you're doing and I need you to go teach your staff about all these different areas? Not necessarily, right? But again, if we're talking about challenging ourselves professionally, it might not be the worst thing in the world, right? To have some of these different things. We've been able to put some of this stuff into our, career readiness curriculum with the university that we work with, where when my students come in, one of the first classes they take is a 3 credit hour elective NIL and financial literacy class. They do the first half of it of NIL rev share, learning about what that is, how it's processed, where this money comes from. And then the second half of that is financial literacy, where they're talking about and writing papers and doing project on some of those things. Again, trying to figure out how do we ingrain it in these particular areas and how this can work for your staff as well, and how you as a staff member can kind of read up and understand it. Because I guarantee a lot of us are a lot more well versed in these areas than we probably was when it started. I know I am. I couldn't tell you anything about an LLC, honestly, outside of what I was doing on my own consulting before 2019, 2020. Couldn't tell you anything about certain tax codes, couldn't tell you anything about how you can write stuff off. Now I know that like the back of my brain, right? I know Roth IRA, I know investment, I know S&P 500, I know exactly where people need to invest. I know everything, right? So this kind of helps. So students have helped me in that area, right? So again, as a professional, these are the different areas and places we can grow. So again, as we talk about growth as professionals, introducing A standards, right? So these are the ways in which in our department we have started to completely, and not just in academics, not just in student support, anything that touches students, anybody that works in our department, we start to think completely different about our employees. So we're so student focused about how we can get with them. Well, what are the key competencies that I need every single employee, whether you touch student athletes, whether you don't? If you just work in college athletics, what are the things I need you to do? Like, what are the really critical areas? And so when we look at NACE standards, and some of you probably heard of NACE standards, and some of you probably have not. I started at first doing this just with GAs and interns. And then I kind of realized, like, if you look at some of this stuff, it's people been working 20 years that haven't developed some of these skills, right? So we said, okay, let's kind of come back a little bit and let's figure out how we can get these down within our evaluation within different areas to really kind of work with our staff, right? So one of them, career and self-development, right? And now, mind y'all, look at this. I made a shift, it's split. Not talking about the students anymore, but we talking about ourselves. We talking about staff. So again, colleges and employers, our key competencies, career and self-development. I really want to harp on this one a little bit because I feel like this is the point that really becomes contentious, and nobody really talks about this now in college athletics. Nobody really talks about the career growth and standards of our professionals, right? So again, all this money boom for coaches, all this money boom for ADs, all this money boom for top end, top line people, student athletes, but we didn't talk about the career growth and standards of folks in our area, right? Folks in those particular levels, right? So career self development, what does that look like? How much do you want to make? What do you want to do? Right? How do you even talk about that? Right? That's huge. I always tell my staff any plans, anything that they want to do, we're going to talk about that in your evaluation. I want you to give me your 3 to 5 year plan of what you think you want to make, what title you think you want to be within the next 3 to 5 years. And we can keep it 100 with you is, hey, this person in front of you is never going to leave. So maybe by this year, next year, we can look together. You can look other places. That's fine, right? I guarantee you, you'll have a healthier staff. I had a employee who really wanted to be back in DC. She was driving back and forth to DC all the time. Not necessarily that far, from where we are, but I knew she really wanted to be there. We talked about that, the evaluation. We talked about that with her growth plan. As soon as I saw a job open at Georgetown, I think you should apply for this. It doesn't have to be contentious, right? So we're kind of working through those areas. You want to make sure not only that you're growing your people, a healthy staff, a staff that knows that you have support and growth. They'll either decide, okay, hey, I want to stay and I want to grow here, or that, hey, Ron knows they're helping me out with some of these things, right? So career and self-development is critical. These are things that we cannot not talk about this with our staff. We cannot act like, hey, that advisor who's been there for 5 years as an advisor doesn't want to eventually move up. We know that's going to happen. So those are the one big things that we talk about when we talk about culture. Communication, another really critical component. Now, this is really tough, y'all, for me with the new employees coming in because people don't know how the kids don't know how to communicate. Nobody knows how to communicate for real, right? So, really teaching communication, knowing that they can talk, knowing the right times to communicate, knowing that if you're a boss or if there's somebody you want to work with is really busy, then maybe you set that appointment, whether it's through email or that person's preferred method of contact. And then once you do that, kind of come in again, depending on what it is, have an agenda. I know my AD, right before he retired, I would come in there, bop in there, like, we'd love to meet with you and just start talking. He's like, yeah, Ron, bring an agenda. Right. So really figuring out some of those communication standpoints. Critical thinking. This is the hardest one for me on here out of all of these because I don't know if critical thinking is inherent, right? I've been kind of like arguing back and forth with myself. Like, y'all ever meet somebody you like, did you think about that? We work with this with students all the time, but I'm like, I don't know if critical thinking is really inherent. I don't. I'm still thinking. I don't know if anybody got in the chat to think it is critical thinking a learned skill. I'm still struggling with that, right? I'm still struggling. If can I teach critical thinking, but I do. I try to. We try to teach learning lab. So if somebody brings us a problem, we do learning lab once a month. We try to put it on the board and be like, how do we work through this? So here's the problem. What's the intended outcome? Great. Now that we know the intended outcome, that's what we call our North Star. If we know our North Star, then we can kind of work through those things, right? And the people heard the STAR method, right? Your situation, your task, your action, result. We kind of work the STAR method as well, right? So knowing your North Star. Somebody did this on the test. Let's say they cheated on the test. We need to resolve and have a resolution for them with the professor. Now we can kind of work through those different methods. So again, I don't know if critical thinking inherently can be taught, but you can definitely kind of help somebody move along the way and start to think about those different areas. Equity and inclusion. Now, not in the your cliche where people's like, oh my God, the DEI, but in thought, right? So we talking about equity and inclusion in thought. These are still important, extremely important in the landscape of what we have because we have students from different walks of life, different countries, different background, different race, creeds, ideals, things of that nature. So it's important to know that the way I work with my football team will be completely different from my tennis team because my men's and women's tennis team is probably going to be majority international. I think I may have two Americans, maybe my young ladies from my women's tennis team, a lot of them here are from Russia and Ukraine, and I know they have stuff going on. And okay, how are we tending to their needs, right? So again, thinking about some of those things as a professional is important. Leadership is not inherent as well, right? Now, unlike critical thinking, I think you can actually teach leadership. When I was in the military, that's all we talked about, and I thought it was the wildest thing. Why are we always talking about leadership? Transactional, transformational, laissez-faire. Like we talked about leadership all the time. But I completely understand now, right? I always tell folks when they go through their career and they're developing, is let's say you're a really good advisor, or people ask me, how do I get where I am now? You can be a really good advisor, but being a really good advisor gets you to maybe a director, right? Might be a really, really good advisor, you really good director, but the way that you kind of transfer over right to leadership and administration and kind of keep going from there is how you lead other people. So if you're the best advisor we got, your value as a leader is training people to be just as good of advisor as you are. That's leadership, just as good. If you can get people to kind of follow in your footsteps or even be better than you, right? A people hire A people, B people hire C people, if you can really figure those things out, that's really important in those areas. Teamwork, again, teamwork is not inherent. You do have to teach people how to play fair in the sandbox. I know it's tough. I know a lot of times at these departments, we have people coming and going. You have GAs, you have interns, especially with students coming in and out now, coaches coming in and out now. You are now mixing more personalities than ever, and it's really tough. It's really, really tough, right? I'll even give y'all a quick example. I was going on a road trip with some of our students. Wasn't that long. We was just taking them up there to a game to shoot some content for baseball. And then as soon as I get in the car, I just hear no, because I don't play like that. And I'm like, no, 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 stop. We're not about to start the ride like this, right? So again, teamwork, conflict. How do you have people work through some of those different areas, right? Hey, I know y'all are young, y'all are GAs. We're about to go on a road trip. If you want to ever me to ever take you on a road or allow you to go somewhere else, here's how you work through conflict if something happens with somebody else, right? So kind of working through those different areas. And the last one is technology. Technology is a polarizing one now because of AI, because of a lot of different things. But again, we will also be very, very concerned with, again, sometimes some of the younger folks in the workforce who may or may not know how to work Excel or may or may not know how to work a PowerPoint or may or may not know how to work Microsoft Word, even at some of those different areas. Or can you use AI as a tool and not necessarily something that you lean on? I teach my students all the time, AI can help you, help guide you, but it shouldn't critically think for you, right? It shouldn't make decisions for you. Or there's an assignment that I give out in one of my classes where I tell them to use AI on the creation of the entire assignment, right? And then, but you got to figure out the execution of the project. Ooh, and they struggle. I'm like, it told you what you're supposed to do, right? So again, teaching critical thinking in some of those areas is really important in that particular, in this particular parts. So, what are the applications of these to us as professionals, right? We have to model these competencies. That's first, right? So, you as the leader, you as the person in that spot, and we'll talk about leadership. We must model these competencies. We must develop these competencies within ourselves. We must assess them, right? What does this look like in our area? What technology do we have? What is critical thinking here at this institution, at this level in our department? If we can't teach it clearly, we do not understand it well enough, right? So those are the things from a leadership standpoint and from those areas, and this inherently passes along to your students. We often focus a lot on student athlete growth, but we kind of neglect our own right key question. What's your personal development plan? Right? What's your personal development plan? I harp on this with people more than ever now because I can't do this for you. I can't, as a leader, I can't do this for you. If I hire you here and I bring you to Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and I give you a job and I go through these different things, I can't keep you happy if we can't create a plan for you and I know what you're looking for, right? External validity exists on the internet, on LinkedIn. I got a job, look at me, woo, right? But when you have to do this work, right? What's your personal development plan? Where do you want to go? How do we align what we need as an organization with what you need as a professional, right? As personally as well, and that helps in the student athlete area. You come in with a bad time, the student's gonna have a bad time, right? Because it's not inherent, it's not really built in. So we want to really figure out some of those different points and topics. It's really important to us, especially as we define out what success is for students. And building your career and growth plan, building your career growth plan and skill area for growth, right? So this is something that applies to everybody. I always talk about it with everybody because it goes back into what we're doing for students. If your cup is half empty, you cannot pour out of an empty cup, right? Not even a half empty cup, barely, right? You have to be full, you have to be fulfilled, right? And that's hard for everybody because there's different things that happens. But figuring out your growth plan, right? Whether it's revenue generation understanding, whether it's NIL and contract literacy, data and analytics, mental health awareness, leadership and supervision, public speaking engagement. Where is somewhere where, if you know the job like the back of your hand, what area can you grow in? I took over the MMR a couple years ago, and I couldn't tell you what MMR was. Who is Playfly? Who is Learfield? I always heard of them my whole career. I don't know what they do. I don't know what they do. I know now intimately, really what they do now, but back then I didn't. That was growth for me, right? NIL and contract literacy. That was growth for me, right? I knew I had mental health. I knew I was working in some of these other areas, but figuring out what that growth for me looked like helped me better serve my student athletes. So the growth doesn't happen by accident, right? You don't just kind of stumble into stuff sometimes. Well, I mean, you do, right? Depending on the needs, but it doesn't happen by accident, right? For you to really be really good at it. Titles do not equal development. I can promote you, but that doesn't mean you learn anything, right? So you need to be learning on top of your titles and your development. Time and role does not equal readiness, right? So we all see that all the time. Y'all, especially when we interview, we're like, oh yeah, this person's been at school A for 5 years an advisor, and this person was a grad assistant, but it seems like the person that was grad assistant is a little bit more ready, right? So time and role doesn't always equal readiness. And then you must pursue growth. You have to. You got to pursue growth and you got to be relentless in your growth and not for it to come off as selfish of like, what he doing? He trying to go to all these conferences. That's not what I mean. But when I started moving into the advancement area, when we say student athlete advancement here, I'll lead all fundraising efforts primarily for student athlete areas, right? NIL, rev share, We built the dining hall, scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. So what does that look like for me as a person who's only been in academics most of my career? Certificate online, things of that nature, Coursera. I really wanted to understand what development was or what fundraising was, things of that nature. I didn't know. I didn't even know that development in the word development meant relationship development. That's what it is. They just cut off relationship because I guess it sounds corny and they call it development. I'm like, oh, right. So these are things and areas that I'm really learning, and you have to pursue growth, right? And so this is for everybody to really think about their own area as you grow, as you evolve, what you want to do on your campus. It's important because it's always going to be somebody else coming behind you that wants to take your role. How can you grow? How can you learn more at your institution to better serve your student athletes? Then leadership responsibility for any of us in leadership roles. It's really important for leaders to set vision, to provide resources, to hold teams accountable, and to model growth. This is the hardest part because sometimes I will be exhausted, right? But I do understand. Like I'll be in my office, my phone pinging, everybody asking me something. I'm like, man, come on, man. Like somebody just asked me what kind of day I'm having. I also understand that it's important for me to model growth. Right. I also understand that again, I'm setting the vision, I'm setting the direction, I'm holding folks accountable, right? This is all what we need. And then overall, it's culture. How am I driving culture? Am I a staunch defender of our culture? If somebody, a student athlete, a coach, a staff member comes in and threatens that culture, are we able to address it in the right way to be able to work together as a staff, right? And that's kind of what I tell my staff and with my folks. So again, are we growing intentionally? Does my team have a clear development model? My team needs to have that. We need to have these hard conversations. Bosses, leaders, we can't be so shallow to think this person's gonna stay with you forever. The more prepared that we are, the better that we can serve our student athletes. You don't want to advise or leaving in the middle of the semester, and it's like, oh man, like, what am I doing now? How am I scrambling? Because we all been there, right? How are we serving our student athletes? Because again, that affects the bottom line of student athlete development. Can I define success in measurable terms, quantifiable, and qualitatively quantifiable? Can I define it? Can I talk about it? Can I put it on paper? What does success look like? What does success look like here? You have to be able to define that to tell your story, especially if you want to fundraise and bring more resources to your area. And lastly, are we preparing student athletes for life or just sport? Right? That's the real one. Are we? Right? Where are we at with that? And then if we feel like that we're not preparing them for life, what growths and tweaks that can we do? Right? Is it a particular team you're struggling with? Is there a particular coaching staff you're struggling with? Think intently about how we can kind of grow and work and collaborate in those areas. Because success looks different. Success looks completely different. So this is how I define success for my student athletes. You all can look at or say however you define it, but I like students who can explain their value. And I use value not necessarily in quantifiable terms. I like that they try to quantify themselves, but can you explain your value when it's time for you to go out here and get a job? I tell my basketball players all the time, being 6'7" is not going to get you a job. It's not. You can't walk into a dealership and be like, yeah, I'm 6'7". So, that how do you quantify your value? That's your basketball value. That's your positional value. That's your relational value, right? So how do you quantify that value? Can they manage their money now, especially with everything that they have going on? Money management, financial management for me now, because of what's going on, is huge. It's paramount, right? Especially for some of my athletes who go from making, my quarterback went from making one amount here to multi-millions at his next institution. It's really important for me that I know that he can manage that amount, right? Because he didn't necessarily have that here, or, if they transition. Build and leverage a network, extremely important because especially with them traveling all over the place, do you have where you an alumni of? Where you going to homecoming again, right? Those things are naturally inherent. And then again, transitioning successfully after sport. That's my favorite thing. I tell people that all the time. I love it. I love it. I went to a draft party for one of my students and they all went out and they was doing a bunch of stuff. And what I loved about it was there was only one or two of them that was pros. The rest of them, I can quantify their job. I can point like, oh, he's a physical therapist. He does medical device sales. This person's a teacher, right? It felt really good to know that they were kind of working through some of those things. So again, what does success look like for you, right? Kind of having everybody pinpoint what that looks like. So I know I done took up a lot of time. I done finally, boom, boom, got to the end. Appreciate you all being here. I want to leave some time now for, any questions, thoughts, challenges, opportunities, anything that anybody has. Also, if you all have any questions, you want to talk on a personal level, it's really easy to find me as well. And then we also can talk about some of these different things that we're working on a national level, on the committee level.
If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or place them in the chat.
Hey, no questions. That's not always bad. Hmm?
I thought that was a very thought-provoking presentation. One thing I definitely had not necessarily thought about is a lot of our young men and young women are seeing money that they will never see or will not immediately see in life. And how do you navigate those conversations with student athletes as they move on, not into necessarily as economically fruitful positions, especially right at first? All right. Well, seeing no questions, thank you so much, Dr. Moses, for joining us. Really appreciated your talk. Oh, we had a hand raised. Wait 1 second. Oh, okay. The chat is not necessarily working. Can you use the Q&A feature? It should be under the more component, the three dots. We can field questions from there. Carol, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. Oh, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Try, Carol.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear?
Oh,
Yep,
I'm
I can hear.
Can
okay.
you hear?
So, I went
Okay.
to women's basketball and I listened to a lot of what you were saying. Um, and the difference, and this just is me and my experience, I was dealing with both male and females, but mostly women during this NIL era. Um, I think because they're smaller teams and the dynamics that you get to build relationships with the parents as well as with those additional people within their group, their managers, their PR people. Um, have you seen those differences? For me, it's actually been good because I have access to those people, um, and we kind of work together on schedules
Can you turn it up?
and NIL appearances and things like that.
Yeah, so you asked, have I seen differences in just kind of how they're handled or how much money
Well, kind of both.
So it's really interesting, right? Because when NIL and rev share first came in, I think a lot of times people got it mixed up with Title IX, right? So they kind of was just like, oh yeah, the women automatically get what the men get. No, it's equitable, right? Because now we're talking about revenues. And it's always a very uncomfortable conversation when you talk about revenues because again, the majority of your sport are, in here at ODU, we use ticketed versus non-ticketed, right? So if you are a non-ticketed sport, you are not drawing any type of revenue, right? And so now it figured out, okay, hey, my football team, my basketball players, they are making more because here are these revenues. Revenues also include buy games, right? So I also work with women's basketball. So again, I can get three basketball buy games and get $400,000. Three women's basketball buy games nets me 60, maybe. Right. So now we're talking about just general revenues and NIL. So I really think, especially at the top levels like your LSU's, your South Carolinas, things of that nature, they're able to expand that a little bit more. But I do think in sports such as, every school is trying to have their premier, women's sports. So again, in volleyball has grown immensely. Women's basketball has grown immensely. Here at ODU, we're traditionally a field hockey, women's tennis powerhouse. We've kind of grown a lot of things in those areas. So I do think it's growing, but I think it's targeted. And the biggest thing with NIL is we follow market trends. So I always kind of inform my student athletes. I'm like, look, women spend a lot of their money on health, beauty, and Beyonce. And those men, they'll buy no, but they're gonna go to that football game,
Yeah.
right? So making sure that they understand some of those different areas. So we work a lot in branding and kind of working through some of those areas. But I do think from what we've seen, the men are kind of like, okay, cool, you got this money, cool, great, give it to me. And then a lot of our female athletes are more so a little bit more thoughtful about, okay, how can I make good brand initiatives and standards, and then can this lead also into some job prospects as well?
Thanks.
If you raise your hand as a reaction, I will be able to allow you to speak. Sorry about the disabled chat, y'all. We also have another question. What are some of your thoughts? I think you addressed that one. What is some of the feedback that you receive from the coaches when they lose out on student athletes to the portal due to revenue sharing or not being able to afford them anymore?
I mean, that's a big topic. I'll give you all just some insight at the NCAA convention this year. We had the FTC and a couple other areas kind of come and look into just agents, right? I think agents has kind of been the big topic surrounding that, right? Of like market and we've all probably seen student athletes that were okay with the number that was going to be shared, and then the agent or somebody comes in and says that's disrespectful, or that's not necessarily what they should have. But I mean, we see it all the time. We have coaches complain all the time at the national level. The number, the number kind of continues to grow. And then lastly, when we talk about the house settlement and we talk about the CSC and we talk about everything that's supposed to be signed with the house settlement, as you have all seen, every school has not signed the house settlement, right? So it's not ratified as a whole. So when we decided that the 20.5 million was supposed to be the cap, we all agreed at a powerful level, and us agreed that 20.5 was supposed to be the cap, and schools immediately decided to exceed it, right? So that's just kind of what it is from some of those standpoints. So again, it's going to be a rat race until we get some regulation. But even when we get regulation, it's never going to be fully regulated because you're always going to have states and governors and governments until it's regulated at the highest level that say, okay, well, I want us to win, so I can circumvent it at my state level, right? And that's kind of necessarily where it's things are being done, right? It's not even picking on Louisiana because most of our eligibility changed because of West Virginia, right? Literally, both of them changed in West Virginia in some of those areas as far as student athletes being immediately eligible and having injunctions as far as years to play. So those are the things that I always tell coaches we have to use kind of what we can and what we have. But honestly, it's always players out there. So when I had a coach yesterday tell me I can't get no players because it is. And I'm like, well, we got X amount of rev share. It's more than those other schools, and they got players. Right. So, but it is a tough conversation. And it is something that's going to be really hard to regulate because how do you regulate an unregulated market, right? Especially in college athletics. Tough.
I definitely see your comment, Dr. Wiley. I will share your information with Dr. Moses as well. Thank you so much. We are at time, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining us for our midday session. We have some fantastic additional presentations for the rest of the day through our 5 concurrent sessions. So please enjoy. Don't forget to fill out your evaluation at the end as well. And once again, thank you for attending, and thank you, Dr. Moses, for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate you all hopping on with me today.